Ever since I was a kid, I've been pretty obsessed with the Civil War. Maybe just because I grew up hearing stories about my ancestors who fought and died in it. Maybe it's just because it's one of the most bloodiest and transformative wars in history. Over 750,000 people died, states were split apart, families torn to pieces, and its legacy still echoes through America today. From the way some states vote to the flags that they fly, it is the deadliest conflict in American history. And I've always loved games that try to capture it. But Civil War games, they are exceedingly rare. The first one I ever played was History Channel's Civil War: A Nation Divided. I picked it up for around $3 at Goodwill, and it was clunky, it was messy, but I loved it. It let me be there, even if just for a moment. And then came Ultimate General Civil War, a game which, hey, I made a video on, go watch it. It was a lot better. It let me play as a general, commanding troops, making tactical decisions on the battlefield, but something was still missing from it. I was just a small piece of the puzzle. The war itself, the bigger picture, I had no control over it. But when it comes to truly feeling the weight of the war, the strategy, the logistics, the politics, no game has ever done it justice, until now, or should I say 4 years ago when this game came out. But this is Grand Tactician: The Civil War. And it's not just a game, it's not just tactics, it's command, it's diplomacy, it's supply line and reinforcements. It's the weight of an entire nation on your shoulders. Are you going to lead like Lincoln? Are you going to fight like Lee? Are you going to unify a nation? Or are you going to let it crumble? The choice is yours in Grand Tactician: The Civil War. And I want to go over why it's the most realistic Civil War strategy game ever made. But what makes it so realistic? Well, it's not just one thing, it's truly everything about it. It's the way that you're forced to think like a general, strategize like a politician, and plan like a logistician. So I want to go over what I mean. So this game has what I call the 3 pillars of realism. First, there is tactical realism, operational realism, and strategic realism. For tactical realism, this game isn't like chess. You don't just move pieces around on a board. You issue orders, and just like in real life, orders take time. Flanking matters in games. You are going to want to use actual tactics. While you can just line up your men across the enemy and hammer rounds at each other, that is costly and ineffective. Your men's experience, strength, and weaponry matters in every engagement. Now, I do want to take some time to go over a bit more of the actual historical context of the war. The Civil War is considered by most historians to be the first modern conflict. This is the first conflict where artillery became breech-loaded, which means that it was loaded from the rear instead of the front, which increased firing rate and accuracy. This is also one of the first conflicts where rifled muskets were used, which were much more accurate and deadly compared to smoothbore muskets, which were used in armies before the conflict. This is also the first time where a Gatling gun was used, which is basically a machine gun. Now, it wasn't exactly a battlefield staple at the time, but it is still the first time in history where a machine gun was used for purposes of war. The logistics of this war were also revolutionary. For the first time, troops were loaded on trains and quickly transported across the country, and it also allowed supplies to travel much quicker. No longer did horses and buggies have to transport everything. This was also one of the first wars with mass-scale conscription on both sides, where citizens were forced to join the army. This can be seen a bit as a precursor to World War I, where mass conscription was very common, as well as trench warfare, which also first sprung up during the Civil War at battles like Vicksburg or the Siege of Petersburg. The U.S. Civil War was a bridge between old Napoleonic-style warfare and modern industrialized total war that the 20th century has come to know, and the game models these tactics perfectly. Unlike Napoleon's time, you are no longer going to have mass cavalry charges that break the enemy. In this game, and much like real life, they're only going to be slaughtered. They're much better to be used as flanking troops who engage the enemy and distract them, for your regular infantry to then break them. The men's morale plays a big factor. When you first start the war with inexperienced men, they are going to be liable to run if they take any losses, even if they're small. You have to play it smart until your men get trained up and used to combat. You need to use cover, which can be built during battle, or you can use the woods and creeks to protect your men. You can hide in houses. You also need to be aware of the topography of the map. If you station your artillery in the woods, they are not going to be able to see anything. You need to deploy them on flat terrain or at the top of hills. You also need to keep in mind the fatigue of your troops, their ammunition levels. This game really has you thinking like a general from 1861. But war isn't just fought on the battlefield. In Grand Tactician, you don't just control generals, you control the entire war effort. You decide where to build supply depots, which railroads to protect, and how to manage reinforcements. This is where operational realism comes into play. When you control armies, you need to make sure that they have supply depots nearby to keep them equipped and well fed. They will not be up for any combat if you march your armies 50 miles away from supply depots and let them starve and run out of ammo. Even if your troops are able to forage for food and what they need, they are going to run out of ammo and be fish in a barrel for any enemy troops you come across. You also need to use railroads to quickly and efficiently move troops from theater to theater or wherever the strategic situation demands. You also have to individually raise troops for each army, and these are farther broken down into corps and brigades who you can then farther customize either in looks or what equipment they're using. You also need to be smart about where you're raising the troops from. If you want to enlist troops from, let's say, Kentucky, but Kentucky is getting ravaged by the war, those troops will be much more liable to either desert or not re-enlist when their contract is up. Now, the game does give you some strategic objectives to work towards. These are things like win the first major battle, capture states and ensure their loyalty, capture the enemy's capitals. These strategic objectives give you a focused plan to follow to win. Because if the enemy's nation morale or support drops below a certain level, you will win the game. Every decision that you make needs to ensure that your troops will have the means and supplies to fight on. If you're only focused on the front lines, you've already lost. And then finally, you're not just a general or a collection of generals. You are the entire government. You can influence the economy, diplomacy, and public opinion of your nation, which is where the third pillar of realism comes into play, strategic realism. You have a big multitude of options and policies to pick from, and you unlock more the longer the war goes on. As the war starts, you'll be picking options like choosing to start raising volunteers or issuing letters of marque to privateers that will help supplement your navy, to eventually, depending on your nation that you choose to play as, either enlisting slaves to help the Confederacy, or even freeing slaves and issuing the Emancipation Proclamation as Lincoln. You also have to run your economy. The more expenditures you gain, the worse credit limit you'll get, which will limit the amount of troops that you can raise and can also prevent you from paying the troops you have in the field already. You get to decide where the government puts its money. Whether it's domestic industry or diplomatic missions, you decide, and there's benefits and cons to both. If you're the Confederacy, it might behoove you to focus more on diplomacy to try to get the French and English on your side and help you out. Or you can also try to go it alone and focus more on domestic industry to be able to produce more weapons to be able to equip your army. You're also going to need to build things like iron foundries or markets or military buildings, anything that the country needs to continue on its war effort. If the country's government loses support and collapses, you are going to lose the war. This is a war on every front, not just the battlefield. Now, I know what you're thinking based off of the gameplay that you're seeing, what I've talked about. Is it too hard? And honestly, yeah, but that's kind of the point. If you want a simple RTS, go play Command & Conquer or Halo Wars or something. This is for players who want to feel the weight of every decision that you make. Now, you can choose the difficulty of the enemies that you're fighting, and you can even add some alternate history starts to make the game easier or more fun or interesting, like for the North, supporting abolitionists from the very start of the war, which increases the amount of support that you have in your states and other slave states that stay with the North, or choosing to have the Underground Railroad be a thing and a much larger scale, which also decreases support for the Confederacy. Or for the South, you could have things such as the South being in control of Cuba, or them starting industrialized, or them having more railroads. There's a lot of alternate history things that can make this game more fun and easier. Now, as I talked about, the game is still hard. Much like real life, if you play as the Union, you will have an easier time. You have more manpower, more industry, and you're the one who has to attack, not the Confederates. They will take a more defensive approach, allowing you time to build up. But playing as the Confederates is the hard mode. You will be constantly assailed by Union troops who won't stop until you return to the Union. I've played a lot of Civil War games, but none have ever made me really just feel connected to it or like I was there. You know, I thought about my ancestors who fought and died in this war. I thought about the generals making decisions that would echo throughout history. Grand Tactician doesn't just let you play a game, it lets you experience the war from every angle and feel it.